My name is Aaron Scott. I'm here from New York City. I'm an artist and furniture designer. When I came here, flying over Iceland and seeing the landscape just covered with snow, all the mountain chains and glaciers and all of that, just this kind of blanket of white with the topography made me think of crumpled paper. And so I started experimenting with paper, making some drawings of paper, and using that as a way to sort of conceptualize landscape. In the past, my work has dealt with topography, specific topographies, and I was interested in a kind of more, on one hand, more abstract relationship, but also more concrete, which is the idea of how mountain chains are formed by kind of the same mechanical process as crumpling paper. And so thinking about the process of orogenesis, how mountain chains are formed in the lithosphere, this force of lateral compression, things sort of having this energy colliding or being subducted or whatever happens, that there's this kind of deterministic process with disordered or chaotic results. And that's the same thing that happens with crumpling paper, that you can take a sheet of paper and crumple it, and that pattern of creases and ripples and folds is totally unique. You can never repeat that same crumpling. Even in a laboratory with like perfect conditions, it can't be repeated. So this is something that interested me as a way of just kind of finding like a new vocabulary to talk about landscape or draw landscape or think about landscape. And so yeah, I made some kind of like academic studies of crumpled paper. That was kind of my way of starting this process, because I like drawing and find it very relaxing, a way to kind of start to think about these specific forms. And then from that point, thinking about like this concrete object of crumpled paper and what that would be like. And so I started trying to cast a plaster mold of paper, and that was more difficult than I expected, but eventually it worked, and I was able to sort of build a mold out of paper, entirely out of paper, that I could pour plaster into, and then remove the paper and have an exact representation of that piece of A4 paper. So I did a few versions of that, and then kind of on the side I was working on these volumes, on these like very simple volumes, cylinders, cubes, that I would crumple and try to sort of preserve the form that resulted from that and cast that in plaster, which I did as well. And then finally working on kind of mappings of crumpled paper, so drawings that are just literally crumpled paper, flattened out, and tracing those lines and sort of having this just schematic of the sort of lines of force that created the creases in the paper. And a couple of them, like just assigning random colors to different areas of the drawing and coloring them in. A lot of my design work deals with movement, dynamism, tension, sort of, trying to capture in a way the force of movement or change or deformation or some form being twisted or torqued. And it's been interesting to me to think about movement in another sense, which is almost a more kind of mathematical sense. And being in Iceland, in such a kind of incomprehensible landscape, at least in it's pretty geologically complex and very, I think, very difficult for someone who hasn't spent a lot of time here to really grasp. Thinking about landscape in terms of geological time, in terms of how landscape is formed through this kind of very arbitrary but yet deterministic process, that the sense of chaos that results from that is something that's, I think, important to understand or to somehow grapple with. And so for me, there's an opportunity to introduce more of that kind of disorder, I guess, into my work, or establishing some parameters within which I can really allow chance to play a more significant role. And yeah, I think it'll be interesting to see how that translates into the work that I'm doing in design.